how should I approach reinvention? Because a 20-year-old versus a 30-year-old versus a 40-year-old, it's going to be vastly different. You know, let's talk about individual first. Maybe we can talk a little bit about organization, but that's a different space also, right? How do you think, what would be a model? Is that the model that you apply? Or what would your approach of, hey, you know, it's time to reinvent? Like, how would you know when, and what would be the thinking be? Just like thinking, the world's changing so quickly. I think there's always an inertia or a fear growing up. Like, oh, what's it going to be? Am I ready? What happens if my job changes? I lose my job? Am I preparing myself for the future to really set myself up for success? You know, these are things that goes through many people's minds, right? Across different decades, like 20, 30, 40, for example. So as a 20-year-old, you know, how would you approach reinvention, right? You know, it's probably very different from a 40, 50-year-old person. You know, what are your thoughts there?
How do the artists think about it? Like, I'm a young artist, I'm coming out. I know I have some level of talent. The world is changing. Streaming is it now. Breaking into mainstream is hard. How do artists think about it?
I think that's a great question, right? So I think the way you approach it is, if you look at a young artist, like 20-year-old, I think that's a lot of space for experimentation. And I kind of map it towards your life chapters also, right? As you go, again, everyone has their own journey. So as you get older, you will have different responsibilities.
Priorities will change.
Priorities will change. Values will always be there, but all these things will shift, right? So as a younger artist, I think your mindset would be like, it's very different also. I think, so my approach would be, if you are 20, I think you should experiment, you know, try different things. But that should continue. So my baseline of reinvention is about curiosity. Curiosity and having a mind of what that really looks like. Because if you're remaining curious, I always say this, like, if your curiosity, your mind's always open. The moment you're starting to judge, you're shutting doors. So curiosity opens doors, judgment closes doors. So curiosity is key. So if I were working with a young artist, for example, like, I'll be asking many questions between both of us, like, how do you foresee things happening? What are you really good at? What your strengths are? What are you known for? And how would you envision yourself to be? And then start working towards areas of competency or even skills that you need to develop, or if you think even further, what that might look like. So it's really an exploration, I feel. Like finding a career path. I'm quoting a friend also, he mentioned this, it's really like a scavenger hunt, right? You're trying to find things, right? But if you don't start searching and don't start getting data points or insights and experiences, it's harder for you to make better decisions also. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you know, that's the way I approach it from a thinking perspective.
I don't think it's any different from how I would address it, right? I would say the same thing when you're young. I would say those things. I would say get curious, try many things out, work hard, get to know people. I think it's all those things I don't think would change in regardless of whether it's AI or non-AI, or whether you're in a corporate job or a creative job, right? I would say in your 20s, that's what you do. Have as much output as possible, meet as many people as possible, do as many things as possible, right? And then obviously with the goal of at some point finding something you can do really, really well, or that you really, really love, or you find the space that you can excel in, for example, right? I wouldn't say it's...
Is there an intersection of a Venn diagram?
I was going to draw this up. Maybe you should draw something.
It's one big circle. Right? I wouldn't say it's any different. I mean, the funny thing is, I think in all that, what we are saying is that the emotional intelligence is equally as important as the IQ.
The soft skills are.
The soft skills, being able to navigate, being able to be self-aware of where you are and where you need to be. I think that part becomes probably even more important or even more necessary today than it was when jobs were very linear.
I'm a big proponent of really focusing on strengths, because obviously I'm a strengths coach also, but strengths is really key. Self-awareness, super important. I feel that, and it is a journey. Like, ask me 20 years ago, I had no clue what I want to do. No clue. Many things I expect in my lives. You know, but I think it's just learning and remaining open and exploring. Having the courage to try new things and not being afraid to fail. I think that's also very important.
I agree on all these points. And I think, again, you talk to a 20-year-old, like in my 20s, I had no idea what I was doing, what I wanted. And actually, it's also what you want changes. Like when when you're a kid and you go like, oh, when you're younger, you go like, oh, this is what I want. And then when you get there, you're like, actually, this is not what I want. And it's not because what you want has changed, but because who you are have changed as a person, right? Your values have changed, your perspectives have changed. I think that's kind of interesting. And also when you're in your 20s, obviously your focus is a little bit different. Like now we're more established. So certain things maybe we deprioritize. Freedom is more important. But for them, a lot of times it's also like making, a career, like making a name for themselves. Money becomes important. Time. You always think about like, there's health, time, and money as a spectrum of like three points, right? And then when you're younger, you have a lot more time, a lot more health, but you have no money, so you sacrifice for the other. But then as you get older, the whole pyramid flips.
Yeah.
And you try to, get more time, right? Yeah. Family, things that you want to do. And it's also a case where when you do all these experiments, it's not about finding out what you want, but more importantly, finding out what you don't want.
Yeah.
I think that's that's probably more important to me. Like you find out the things that are non-negotiable, things that you won't do, and then you focus on the things that you want to, right? Yeah. And curiosity is important. I also think what's interesting is there's a concept, and we've talked about this, right? Scott Adams, who wrote the Dilbert comics, talks about this thing called talent stack, right? Which is, to me, an interesting construct, which I wished I knew, like when I was younger, right? Which is the notion that, like we talk about creativity, all ideas are combinational, right? Like no idea is truly original. You always take, different things and possibly non-relevant, non-adjacent things and put them together and they form new ideas. I think skills and experience are similar. Like you want to try to find what your talent stack are that makes you uniquely you. And typically what it is that there is a sort of foundation list of skills that everybody should have, like be able to speak well, write well, critical thinking. But then on top of that, you want to find like the most non-adjacent stuff as much as possible, right? So maybe you're good at data, but you also like ballet. I know, like stuff like that actually brings about something unique for yourself that becomes uniquely you. And you can see a lot of people out there where they have all these insights and ways of doing things that, you don't typically think because they have all these non-adjacent interests. Yeah. I find that fascinating. And I find that's probably the way you should think about it. No longer about like just a linear career path. Yeah.
So in like 20s, it sounds like keeping things really open. Like you're sharing, like that's driving curiosity, that's really experimenting, learning the skills, growing your self-awareness, the emotional awareness, all that is very key. I think that goes along, right? If you kind of build, I love what you said, like the stack. What is it called again?
Talent stack.
Talent stack. Wow. What? Very power. Okay, talent stack. Okay, so if you're building a talent stack for the 20s, okay, that's we spoke a little bit about that. Yeah. That's like some key talent stack. Do you think that changes in your 30s and 40s, or are we just building on it? And what are we exploring if you're building on it? Let's talk a little bit about that, because 20s, okay, just go out and play, try new stuff. You're still young, a lot of energy. Wow, just go, and then maybe land in a place, for example. In your 30s is a different space, and everyone's different.
Yep.
What do you think would be the add-ons to the talent stack? I love that phrase, quite interesting. To the 20s, so I know in addition in your 30s, what would that thing be?
Once you get to your 30s, there is some level of priorities in your life already. Like you need to focus on certain things. I mean, but at the same time, I think the mindset of, I know it's kind of overused, but part of the talent stack is the sort of intrinsic stuff that you develop, right? So we talked a little bit about curiosity, we talked a bit about hard work, like grit, resilience, like things like that is a byproduct of what you built. Yeah. Trying to keep being curious and gaining experiences and learning things, right? And experiencing, I guess, failures in some sense, right? Being able to deal with that and quickly move on. I mean, I always say this, like, everything's a hypothesis until you validate it. So you just see things as jobs and things that you do as experiments, little quick experiments to validate. And if it works, you double down on it. And then that's where you do in your 30s when you figure out like kind of what you don't want and what you want. And instead of breadth, you try to go depth.
Deep.
Yeah.